The untold story of Zsa Zsa Gabor's one child. Zsa Zsa Gabor remained the living embodiment of glamour. A woman cloaked in satin and spotlight, she mastered the art of performance so thoroughly that her very life became a kind of theater. But behind that glittering public facade lay a fracture line, an invisible, unspoken, but profoundly real fault. That crack traced through one life in particular, her only child, Francesca Hilton. While the world obsessed over Zsa Zsa's diamonds, marriages, and one-liners, Francesca lived in the quiet backstage of her mother's legacy. What did privilege cost when love was absent? What happens to a child born of wealth but denied connection? This is the story of the one person Zsa Zsa never played to the cameras for. A daughter whose life was haunted by the echoes of fame and the silence of neglect. Zsa Zsa Gabor was born Shari Gabor on February 6, 1917, in Budapest, Hungary. Her mother, Jolie, was a sharp-minded, entrepreneurial woman who ran a successful jewelry business. Her father, Vilmos, was a soldier with Jewish roots and a stern temperament. Their household simmered with ambition, beauty, and an undercurrent of volatility. Zsa Zsa and her sisters, Eva and Magda, were raised with the unyielding belief that femininity was a currency and glamour a weapon. From an early age, Zsa Zsa was taught to smile, to sparkle, to be desirable, to treat adoration like air. In 1936, she was crowned Miss Hungary. Though some say she was later disqualified for being underage, the title was symbolic, a passport from old Europe to something greater. She studied in Switzerland and later moved to Vienna, where she sang operettas on the stage. But Hungary was no longer safe for Jewish families. By the early 1940s, the Gabor sisters fled Europe's rising fascism and landed in Hollywood, reinventing themselves in the city of dreams. Zsa Zsa perfected her act, an exotic accent, flirtatious wit, calculated poise, and an air of opulent detachment. She quickly became a fixture at social events and in gossip columns. Her appearances in films like Moulin Rouge, 1952, elevated her visibility, but it was her lifestyle, not her performances, that made headlines. She quipped, flirted, and dazzled. Every camera loved her. She once said, "I am a marvelous housekeeper. Every time I leave a man, I keep his house." It wasn't just humor, it was strategy. Her most significant marriage was to Conrad Hilton in 1942. He was a disciplined Catholic tycoon, the founder of the Hilton Hotel empire, a man whose empire matched his ego. Zsa Zsa, unrestrained and image-driven, clashed with his severity. Their union, brief and joyless, was a mismatched collision of power and presentation. From it came one child, conceived during a fractious relationship and born after the couple had already begun their separation. On March 10, 1947, Francesca Hilton entered the world under a cloud of conflict. Zsa Zsa would later claim that the pregnancy came from an act of violence. Conrad at first denied paternity. Francesca's name appeared on the birth certificate, but not in his heart. Her arrival wasn't publicized with fanfare. Instead, it was buried beneath legal disputes and media sensationalism. Francesca entered a world ruled by the illusion of perfection, where any crack in the image had to be sealed with smiles, jewels, and denial, but some cracks run too deep to cover. Francesca Hilton was born into legacy and litigation. Her mother, the luminous actress with a trail of lovers and husbands, and her father, a business magnate whose name became synonymous with global luxury, created a child neither was equipped to raise with tenderness. Her arrival wasn't a celebration. It was a courtroom whisper, a line in a tabloid, and from the moment she drew breath, she was thrust into a world that watched but never embraced her. Just months after her birth, in late 1947, a brazen burglary struck the Manhattan apartment Zsa Zsa called home. The intruder tied up both Zsa Zsa and the nanny, threatening to harm the infant Francesca if they resisted. Jewelry worth over $750,000 vanished that night. The press treated it like a glamorous crime scene, glitz under siege. But to Francesca, though only an infant, the symbolism lingered. Even within wealth, danger loomed, and protection was never guaranteed. She spent her early years in motion, shuttled between palatial homes in Beverly Hills, European estates, and first-class flights that masked the instability of her upbringing. By the time she was 10, she had stood beside martini glasses, been photographed at elite galas, and danced beneath chandeliers that cost more than most homes. Her 11th birthday party, documented in a Life magazine spread, saw her dressed like a debutante, while tuxedoed children and adults mingled in surreal formality. Childhood was more concept than experience. Zsa Zsa, endlessly glamorous but emotionally inconsistent, often saw Francesca not as a daughter but a doll, something to be styled, paraded, and posed for effect. She was the extension of Zsa Zsa's image, a living proof of her seduction, but never her soft side. The attention Francesca received was always filtered through adult agendas. Suitors gave her gifts not out of affection, but to curry favor with her mother. And what of Conrad? He remained distant. When Francesca described their relationship years later, she said, "He was married to his business." She remembered Christmases spent with polite conversation and occasional lunches where awkward silences were disguised by expensive menus. Francesca longed to be claimed, not legally, but emotionally. That acknowledgement never came. This loneliness, enveloped in satin and gold, would color everything that followed. Francesca's teenage years and early adulthood unfolded in the shifting shadows of the 1960s and 70s, a time when society began questioning the very values her mother had built her identity on. While America was undergoing cultural upheaval, Francesca tried to carve out something quiet, meaningful, and entirely her own. One of her earliest assertions of independence was working in the reservations department of the Beverly Hilton Hotel, her father's crown jewel. Guests often raised eyebrows when they heard her last name, sometimes assuming she was joking, but Francesca took the role seriously. It was not a glamorous position, but it offered her the dignity of earning something outside of her mother's shadow or her father's fortune. The staff respected her not for her name, but for her work ethic. Around this time, Francesca also developed a love for photography. Her lens focused not on glitz, but on authenticity. She shot candid moments of celebrities, capturing the fragility behind their facades. Unlike Zsa Zsa, who basked in the light, Francesca looked for stories in the shadows. Romantically, she had fleeting yet meaningful connections. Her brief relationship with comedian Peter Sellers offered a rare sense of humor-laced vulnerability. A crush on Chris Christopherson led to surreal nights, rubbing shoulders with music legends and producers, moments she would recount with both amusement and disbelief. These were the relationships that hinted at deeper yearnings for connection, ones that were rarely fulfilled. Yet, even as she quietly resisted her legacy, Francesca couldn't escape it. Every introduction, every photograph, every headline was accompanied by the weight of her last name. She was not simply Francesca. She was Zsa Zsa's daughter, Hilton's child, and behind that double legacy was a girl still searching for someone to simply ask, "Who are you, really?" By the time Francesca entered her 30s, she had settled into a complex role, the daughter of fame, uninterested in fame. She drifted through small roles in film and television, including a part in Cleopatra Jones and a fleeting appearance in the made-for-TV movie Liz, the Elizabeth Taylor story. But there was never a breakout role, never a red carpet that truly belonged to her, and perhaps she preferred it that way. She pivoted again, this time to stand-up comedy. It was raw, confessional, and often devastating. Her jokes pulled no punches. "I'm the original Hilton," she once opened with, "older, wiser, smarter, and damn wider." Crowds laughed, but her pain seeped through every syllable. She made light of Paris Hilton's wildness, mocked her mother's many husbands, and painted her own life as an ironic tragedy. In 1993, she married Joseph P. Peach, a businessman whose low profile seemed a balm for the chaos of her lineage. But the marriage eventually dissolved. They had no children. She remained a woman adrift, rich in anecdotes, poor in belonging. Outside of performance, she explored humanitarian interests. Through the Conrad N. Hilton Foundation, she sought to reconnect with her father's philanthropic legacy. A planned documentary trip to Africa with World Vision promised redemption, but was ultimately derailed by logistics, lack of support, and the continual shadow of family dysfunction. Even her most sincere efforts struggled for air. And yet she continued. Through it all, Francesca kept showing up on stages, at charity events, behind the camera. She told her story in fragments, but she never stopped telling it. When Conrad Hilton died in 1979, his will left Francesca $100,000. It was a footnote in a $200 million estate. The rest went to the Hilton Foundation. She sued, claiming undue influence. She lost. The verdict felt like confirmation. She had never truly belonged. The late 2000s brought more tension. Zsa Zsa's ninth husband, Frederick Prince von Anhalt, accused Francesca of forging her mother's signature on a $2 million loan. She claimed she did it to save the family's Bel Air home. Von Anhalt claimed it was theft. The case was dismissed, but the rift remained. As Zsa Zsa's health declined following a 2002 car accident, a 2005 stroke, and eventual dementia, Francesca petitioned for conservatorship. She cited neglect and isolation. Von Anhalt fought back. The court gave her limited visitation. Her mother's decline was now something she could only witness, never guide. There were attempts to bridge the divide. Francesca brought flowers. She wrote letters. She left voicemails when Zsa Zsa was no longer coherent enough to answer. Sometimes they would play old songs together, Hungarian lullabies, tinny from an iPhone speaker. But mostly there was silence, a kind of living grief that never found closure. Publicly, Francesca stayed composed, but close friends noticed her growing frustration, a kind of weariness that clung to her laughter. She would sometimes joke, "My inheritance is family drama and expired hotel vouchers." But even jokes couldn't disguise the erosion. The weight of absence finally outpaced the illusions of legacy. In her 60s, Francesca Hilton lived in near poverty. She stayed in weekly motels, sometimes in her car. She told friends she lived with murderers, but still, she performed. Her stand-up routine became her diary. Jokes were survival. On stage, she was no one's daughter. She was her own. Her audiences grew small but devoted. There were open mics, late-night sets at faded comedy venues in West Hollywood, and even a few guest spots on local podcasts. She often wore the same outfit, simple, dark, nondescript. Her hair grayed and her voice rasped, but when she grabbed the microphone, she owned the room. There was a sparkle behind the sarcasm, a defiant dignity that earned applause even when the jokes didn't quite land. Offstage, she tried to write a memoir. She called it Born into the Wrong Lobby. It was a working title, half joke, half truth. The pages were never finished, but those who read early drafts said it was blisteringly honest, a story not of revenge or resentment, but of longing, a quiet, aching wish to be remembered as more than a footnote in someone else's legend. On January 5, 2015, Francesca Hilton collapsed in a West Hollywood restaurant. Her fiancé, Michael, was with her. He called 911. Paramedics arrived within minutes. But it was too late. She died at Cedars-Sinai after suffering a stroke. Her body remained unclaimed for days. Von Anhalt tried to control the narrative. He told the press she was mentally unstable, broke, a burden, but those who knew Francesca said otherwise. She had been trying to rebuild, to document, to reconnect. Her final years were a battle between decay and dignity in its quiet way, had won. Her half-brother Baron stepped in. He arranged the funeral. Francesca was cremated and laid to rest near her Aunt Eva Gabor. Not her father, not her mother, always nearby, never included. There were no front-page tributes, no mass retrospectives. Francesca's passing made the rounds in entertainment gossip circles, but few paused to consider the story behind the name. She had been born into spotlight, yet exited in near obscurity, a quiet reminder that even a famous name cannot promise a meaningful legacy. Some fans posted kind words online, citing her bravery, her wit, her comedy. Others remembered her only as Zsa Zsa's daughter, the one who sued the Hilton estate. But there were also those who mourned deeply. Friends, fellow comedians, and late-night venue owners spoke of her generosity, how she once paid for another comic's groceries in secret, how she encouraged newcomers backstage. Her community wasn't paparazzi or socialites. It was the struggling artists, the misfits, the dreamers, people who saw through glitter and recognized grit. In their eyes, Francesca was more than a forgotten heiress. She was a survivor. In a small, dimly lit venue off Sunset Boulevard, a memorial show was held 2 weeks after her death. A mix of local comics and aging industry veterans took the stage, telling stories about Francesca between sets. They laughed about her dry delivery, cried during the closing tribute. One comic, choking up, whispered, "She should have been the one with a Netflix special." The room applauded, not just in agreement, but in mourning for everything she could have been and everything she already was. Francesca Hilton's life asks us to question everything we assume about wealth, fame, and family. She was the daughter of 2 American empires, one of luxury, the other of image, and yet she died alone, in obscurity, remembered more for her last name than her life. But there was laughter, defiance, and moments of grace. In the face of exclusion, she wrote her own scripts. In the absence of love, she created levity, and in the shadows she stood taller than anyone expected. If this story moved you, we invite you to pause and reflect, not just on the legacy of Francesca Hilton, but on the countless lives we pass by without notice. Every day, the world overlooks people whose names aren't lit up on marquees, who carry stories stitched with pain, perseverance, and quiet strength. By sharing these stories, we shine a light on the overlooked, the nearly forgotten, and the complex beauty of lives lived on the margins of history. Subscribe to our channel for more emotionally grounded, documentary-style narratives that peel back the layers of fame to reveal the human truths beneath. Like, comment, and share this video with someone who believes that legacy is more than wealth. It's about how we're remembered, even if only by a few. Because in a world addicted to spotlight, sometimes the real stories unfold quietly, just off stage, and they deserve to be told.